Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk with Mick Coyle.
Radio City Talk.
Welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monday, and there's lots on the agenda this week, and there's lots to get your teeth into. There's been a really poignant storyline on Coronation Street we're going to be touching on. In fact, we've got one of the scriptwriters in the studio for that one too, plus plenty more to come. Podcast listeners can get extra value as well, because there's loads of different things going on in the city and around the city region from a mental health point of view. My name's Mick Coyle. Get involved with the show yourself by dropping me an email, mick@radiocity.co.uk. You should just mention, by the way, that it's a Tuesday today that we're doing the show because it was a bank holiday. But on Bank Holiday Monday night, Coronation Street had a particularly poignant episode. I'm very pleased to say we've got one of the scriptwriters with us in the studio, Jonathan Harvey. Jonathan, thank you for your time. Really appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure.
Brilliant episode last night. You're working on Wednesdays, or have worked on Wednesday night's episodes.
Yeah, well, there's 18 writers on Coronation Street, so we craft, if you like, the stories together, and then you get individual episodes straight. So I'm sort of aware of the whole of the Aidan story. But yes, Aidan took his own life last night. We don't see any of that, and then his body is found on Wednesday. And my hour-long episode on Wednesdays, there's the reaction of people to this tragedy.
Anyone who saw last night's episode will see sort of the moments of despair and the way that his life was kind of happening in a way. Well, it's difficult, this one, and it's a difficult one to explain because it's not always the circumstances that people find themselves in that leads them to a decision in regard to suicide. Because, of course, if mental health is a factor in their life, then plenty of different things could be going on. Can you set up for us just sort of where Aidan was at in his life?
Yeah, well, it's a funny one. We wanted to tell a story about, well, suicide's the biggest killer of men under 45, and often men aren't very good at asking for help or discussing their feelings. And so, really, if you weren't really concentrating on Coronation Street the last few months, it would be a real shock last night if you hadn't already seen the press, because he looks like he's doing absolutely fine. He's got his own business. Life's kind of sweet, but it's, he's hiding this turmoil, and he's presenting himself to the world as really coping, and he's not. So seeded through the last, say, 3 to 6 months has been this gradual decline. He had an affair last year that he feels really bad about. And ever since then, he's never really felt good enough and like he deserved the stuff that life's giving him. He gave away a kidney, as you do in a soap, to his half sister Carla. And then things have gradually been getting on top with running this business. And behind his back, his ex-girlfriend was pregnant. She's given the baby to somebody else. So there's all these sort of soapy stories going on. But under it all, he's sort of silently in despair, but covering it really well. So he's been, the last few episodes, been saying his goodbyes. And again, you wouldn't really notice it. So he gave a really expensive watch of his to an ex-girlfriend's son. He gave his old engagement ring to his ex-girlfriend, so she could have the money from that. He gave his dad membership of a golf course. He's been putting his affairs in order. And then last night, he's just feeling more and more disconnected from the world, really, and it all came to a head for him last night.
There was a moment which I think, this might be a moment which really resonated with people, where he was essentially sitting in the Rovers and everybody was talking, everybody's joining, everyone's having a laugh and a conversation, and he's just sitting there, and you're almost seeing sort of a shadow of the conversation going on, his detachment from what was going on.
Wasn't it, really? I mean, and we've all felt like that at some point, haven't we? So, but it was really, really well done, I thought.
And now, if we were going back, say, 20 years, if there was going to be a suicide storyline, you'd have somebody who would find out that their wife was having an affair, their business would go bust, and they'd lose their house. The next scene, they'd be in a grotty B&B. The light flickering above the bathroom would be blinking on and off. They'd look down, and there'd be a box of pills and a bottle of alcohol or something like that, and then, screen would fade to black or something along those lines. Very differently this time.
It is, and I think if he attempted suicide and it didn't work, we probably would have done something like that. But because they're sort of the cliched images, aren't they? I suppose it's that thing of mental health problems can hit anyone, no matter how much money you've got, or no matter how successful or unsuccessful you are. So things are going all right for him, really. The people who are employed by him would go, God, he's got everything. They'd be really jealous of that. But we all know that's it's indiscriminate who gets what sort of illness.
But that responsibility is on you now, isn't it?
It is on us, and therefore. It was very, I think, carefully handled. So we don't see the actions. We never say how he actually did it. It's inferred. We don't see the body, that sort of thing, because you have to because he has gone through with this, and then it's a story of the repercussions of that on his family, and then on other men in the street. We've got the David Platt storyline. David was raped a few months ago. He's feeling suicidal at the moment, but because Aidan has gone through with this, he takes from that, oh God, you know what, I don't want that to happen to me, and he chooses to live instead. So yes, it's a different way of telling that story, but yes, I think you could do the cliched pills in the hand and looking in the mirror and the light flickering a bit if you don't go through with it, or as would usually happen in a soap opera, they would take the pills and someone would miraculously just turn up banging the door down and get their stomach pumped before the advert breaks. So yes, it's just a different way of doing it. And because he does go through with it, they released they released it to the press a week before, so everybody knew, so people can choose not to watch. Because obviously there's a lot of triggers there for people who are feeling vulnerable and are feeling down. And therefore you just have, every script we've written has been read by the Samaritans and Calm, the campaign against living miserably. I had to double check what that stood for this morning. I've been throwing that word around. And so I've the hour-long episode on Wednesday, there was notes from them all the time. You just have to be really, really careful when you're describing the issues involved. So
was there anything which, in terms of your writing, anything that you naturally just put on a piece of paper, handed across to them, and they came back to you and said, "Oh, actually, on this"? Because
there was quite a lot. But to be honest, I can't remember the specifics. There was one thing I put in the script that didn't make it to the final edit, which I'm a bit disappointed by, because I think when somebody takes their own life or somebody dies really suddenly, as happened to a really good friend of mine a few years ago, everyone, the people descend like vultures really and go, how did he do it? And actually, I had one of the characters saying, it doesn't really matter how he did it. And I thought that sort of answered a few of the questions about not showing, the ins and outs of the procedure. So I remember I was disappointed that wasn't in it. But, the whole hour it's a very dramatic hour, and there's big discussions in the pub between the workers in the factory about whether it's a selfish thing to do, whether it's the right thing to do, why what drives people to that level. But I think the thing that I find interesting is and hopefully is true to life, is that it's a massive shock to everybody. None of them saw it coming. And I think that's often the case with particularly men when they take their own lives.
Any high-profile death, particularly those of celebrities, many of which have been in the news in the last week, when suicide is potentially a factor, and we don't always find out, there is that sense of, well, what happened? And it's not out of people's sense of, well, I'd like to be better informed about this situation. You do get a sense often that it's about just people being a little bit nosy.
I'm completely guilty of that as well. I'm really nosy. Well, how? And it's. I suppose it's. I think it's 80% nosiness and 20% caring.
But then I guess from the point of the work you've been doing with Carmen and the Samaritans, you've got to take it beyond that point, haven't you? So you've got to say, well, it has happened. It doesn't matter how he did it, but he did it. But then presumably then the storyline will move on and feed into the Platt character, David Platt character, in terms of what the legacy of that might be. Not necessarily lessons learned from Aidan's death, but actually the legacy of his death and that conversation that comes off the back of it. Yeah,
and I think because obviously you do have to have a responsibility, and what you want to get, and what I love I was looking at Twitter a lot last night, was just seeing the conversations that were going on and people talking. I mean, when we did the rape story, however many months ago that was now, I wrote the episode where David was raped, and it's contentious and a difficult issue to have a go at. But the phone line for male rape, the calls to it in the next week went up 1,700%. And, friends of mine told me that they'd been raped 20 years ago, and it was the first time they'd been able to articulate that. So I'm hoping, similarly with this, people are at least knowing that there are places they can go to or people they can talk to or talking to each other. And therefore, if that's what you want to get from the story, we also had to show that in the show as well. So, and I think that's what the show does cleverly on Wednesday, is as well as having the tragedy that there is a sort of positive outcome at the end, that somebody chooses to start talking about how they're feeling. And that it's nice, because when you write for a soap opera, you are often writing, oh, Michelle's been shoved in the boot of a car and, or Rita's shortchanged someone in the shop. And so to do something where I do think it's important, and there is a responsibility to get it right, it's nice to do the job and feel proud of what you're doing. I
mean, you must be very proud. You mentioned the stats there and the facts there off the back of the rape storyline there. The work that you did, the work that you put into that, resonated with, and I guess that's the best thing you can do as a scriptwriter, make things feel real, resonate with people to the point in which they felt powered enough and empowered enough to pick up a phone and make that call. And
certainly already with the Aidan story, that seems to be happening as well. So yes, it's really encouraging.
In terms of how difficult this week's episode, Wednesday night's episode, was to write, was that one of the most difficult episodes you've had to write in terms of the work you had to put into it?
Yeah, I had to write a few years ago when Deirdre died, and Kirkbride. She was a really good friend of mine, and they very kindly gave me the episode where everyone found out she'd died. And I remember writing it. And usually when I've written something, I'll read it again and again and again to just check it's not rubbish, but also check for spelling mistakes. And I couldn't bring myself to read it again. I found that really upsetting. And with Aidan's episode on Wednesday, it was a similar thing. But I was really flattered to get the episode because I knew it was an important one. But I did keep having to go back to it because obviously it wasn't just important what I felt was right. You had to placate the Samaritans and calm so that you were, the social responsibility was in there too. So I did have to keep looking at it again. But because we got a really good team of storyliners on Coronation Street, and they did the bones of the episode. I was told by them what should happen, that sort of thing. So bizarrely, it was although there were quite a few notes compared to some episodes. Sometimes if there's something really dull happening in an episode, you get a million notes because they're trying to make it more interesting. With this, it was just very specific. The notes were all about, I suppose, a duty of care to the audience. And so the notes were more about that rather than the writing or the storytelling. So it was a sort of easier process.
I wonder whether or not sometimes within we've got Jonathan Harvey with us, by the way, on Mental Health Monday. He's a writer at Coronation Street and put together and wrote Wednesday night's episode. If you've not caught up with Monday night's episode yet, available on the ITV hub. Where people want to create interesting storylines, they'll characters, something will happen to them. There'll be a bus crash or a incident with a tram. I often think with mental health stories, and it's one of the things that we sort of really enjoy in terms of doing Mental Health Monday, is that mental health stories are actually interesting stories. They're very human stories. They almost touch at the very heart of what it is to be a human being. It's a very rich seam, if you like. There's obviously tragedy around it, but of course there can be positive aspects to it, and it can affect so many people. I wonder whether or not that it's a useful crutch for a storyline writer, but I wonder whether or not actually script writers and soaps might actually, we can talk about mental health, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a story which is a depressing story or a suicide or a way of getting rid of a character. It can actually be one which really opens up your mind to what a character's going through and really sort of create relatable moments within audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd one really because, well, for instance, say in the last year we've had Gina, who's Sally's sister. She's bipolar. We've had Craig, our wannabe policeman who is suffering from OCD, and you just have to be really careful because with the OCD story, if it's really reduced, it's just a load of shots of him switching on the kettle and switching it off again. So you need to be careful and with what sort of story you're telling. Because also I think a lot, like I've suffered from anxiety for years and I've sort of got it under control now, but a lot of the narrative of a panic attack or suffering from anxiety is all going on inside my head, and therefore, I could be having a massive panic attack now and you might not necessarily know. So it's that internalised thing that I don't know whether it lends itself brilliantly to the medium of television. And also because of the nature of soap opera, it is often pushed to be sensational. So you've got the exciting thing to happen at the end of the episode to drag you back in. So it's sometimes not the best place. But when it's done properly, yes, it's great.
Although we saw it with Shane Ward last night as Aidan. Yeah. He goes into the pub and he kind of brushes aside this conversation he's had about giving the watch away. Hey, don't worry about it, And as you made the point at the start, it was actually quite a poignant moment for him in terms of his goodbyes as well. Yeah. Then the group of friends show up, and then he goes to join in as if, we're not having a big night out. Equally, when he overhears a conversation, he sort of puts on that role of, oh, what? No, I didn't hear that at all. Where actually he did, he heard it all, and it kind of fed into his own personal narrative as well. So it was quite a lot on Shane in terms of him from an acting point of view to put that all across as well. Yeah. I wonder whether or not that was something which, when he first read it, thought, oh right, okay.
Well, I've got no idea because they keep us all very separate. But if you're going to leave a soap opera, what a story to go out on. It's got a lot of people talking. It's a real challenge to play because he's not having the big scene with the bottle of pills, is he? He's having to rein it all in and just show us really subtly what's going on. And then I think there was just the shot at the end of him crying. So yes, it was quite meaty stuff to get into because it was so multi-layered, wasn't it? It was that thing of the swans on the water with looking so graceful, but underneath the legs are going really fast.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing Wednesday's episode, and congratulations on the sort of the work that you've done. We talk a lot on the programme about sort of irresponsible media coverage of mental health. So as soon as we got
it's quite nice to come in and talk.
As soon as we got some positive mental health coverage to touch on.
It's nice on things like Twitter. Usually when you write something on Corrie, you just get a million messages going, oh, nothing like that. And there's been a few of those this time, but everyone's been very encouraging. So yeah, it's good.
Jonathan, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us on Mental Health Monday.
Thank you.
Mental Health Monday
on Radio City Talk
with Mick Coyle.
Tackling the stigma.
Radio City Talk.
Now, very pleased to say, joining us on the programme now, we have a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Liverpool. There is a festival which is about to get underway in regard to mental health, and it's called, well, it looks at many different things. There's a mental health aspect to it. That's what we're going to touch on now. The Pint of Science Festival, taking place between the 14th and 16th of May. And one of the headline acts joins us in the studio now, Peter Kinderman. Peter, it's great to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
You're a showstopper, officially. Just tell us about Pint of Science. It's really good, an interesting idea, this.
So the idea is that academics, especially perhaps scientists, we sit in our little ivory towers and we write incredibly complicated, difficult to understand academic papers that 3 people read, and we should get out there talking with, listening to ordinary people in ordinary circumstances and actually have the same conversations we all have down the pub, but maybe interject those bits that we're expert in.
And this is going to be at Leaf on Bond Street, which is exactly that type of venue where people... Yep. I don't want to say normal people. I'm not saying you don't normally hang around with normal people, but where normal people go.
Well, and for me, it's kind of quite cool because I don't do quantum physics. I do psychology, and psychology happens wherever there are people. So it's people getting together and talking is the stuff of what I do as a scientist.
People want to find out more information. Pintofscience.co.uk has got all the information. The festival running 14th to the 16th of May. And Peter's chat? Seminar? Talk?
No, it's not a seminar. It's a talk. It's, maybe a presentation. Maybe it's a show. Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe it is. That's what it is. A performance. Now, let me get this. Is this the official title? Our Turbulent Minds, Why We're All Crazy, But None of Us Is Ill.
Yes.
That's a great name for an album.
Okay. Hopefully it's a great name for a talk.
Can you give us the gist of the idea of where this talk comes from?
Okay, so I've now been working as a clinical psychologist and working in universities for over 25 years, and kind of my point is that we should understand how our emotions work, how our thoughts, how our behaviours, how our moods work, but not by labelling some of them as symptoms of illness and then trying to treat them. We should understand why we get depressed. If you ask the question, what is the etiology of the disorder, major depressive disorder, and what are the most optimum treatments, you get a very medicalised, very clinical, very unhelpful answer. And people get labelled as having a problem. The problem gets labelled within their heads. People think there's something wrong with them, and they get medication. If you ask what makes you sad, what makes you feel hopeless, what makes you despairing of life even, what makes you tearful, or what makes you happy, you get very different answers. So I think across the mental health field, we should understand that those things, even terrible things, hearing voices, urges to cut yourself, feeling as if you may as well just end your life, these things should be understood as part of what it is to be human, terrible parts of what it is to be human, but as parts of the human condition that we understand and reach out to people with help rather than illnesses that we need to diagnose and treat. So we're all crazy and we all have problems, but it's not an illness.
It's a really interesting thing. It throws up a million and one things. One of the things we do from doing the Mental Health Monday is we talk through a million and one different angles and aspects to this kind of thing. One of the things that always strikes me is that the reaction from the powers that be are often based around, let's have more mental health workers, let's have more mental health first aiders, versus that idea of, well, how do we get people into a position where they won't ever need to visit a mental health first aider, that they know, understand, they have their own toolbox and understanding of ways to deal with things as they come at them that don't then become long-standing issues.
So one of the things there is I don't think we should carry on doing the same thing that we've always done. Somebody says definition of stupidity. And just doubling the money that we spend on mental health may well be a very good thing. And we don't spend enough money, we don't spend enough attention on our mental health. But we shouldn't just double the number of beds and give twice as many people twice the doses of drugs. We should do things differently. So at schools, if you've got a kid who's struggling at school, can't pay attention, just their brain isn't working in such a way that they can pay attention, or maybe they're not motivated, or maybe the teacher is just a middle-class idiot and they're not engaged, or maybe everything in their community tells them that this is a completely pointless exercise. Labelling them as having a disorder like attention deficit disorder and then giving the kid Ritalin to make them stick at school is, in my opinion, the wrong approach. We need to rethink it. We need to think about how we're approaching education, how we're bringing up our kids, how we're motivating our kids, rather than labelling them as being disordered more effectively and treating them more effectively.
But in terms of how the system works, for some, actually, a diagnosis can be a huge relief. Oh, we understand why our son or daughter is in this particular situation. A school can go, here's a tick next to that particular box. We can then kick into a system which exists to help these people. What you're talking about is we've got to think about everything and everybody in a more holistic way?
Yeah, and in a better way. And it's not throwing away what works. So recognising problems, spotting problems, identifying them, responding to them, even ticking boxes. I mean, ticking a box is kind of a bad thing. But if you press the alarm button on this console now and the alarm goes off, people will do things, right? If you notice that a kid is struggling and you press the button, then things will happen. My problem isn't that we identify problems and then respond to them. I think we should absolutely do that. My issue is that when we do that, we slot people into just one way of thinking, which is the kid is ill, the kid has an illness, the illness needs to be diagnosed, and then the illness needs to be treated, rather than what the hell's going on that this kid is sitting in a corner crying. What are we doing? What's the system that we have that is causing this kid to want to avoid turning up at school? What's happening in her life? What's happened to her rather than what's wrong with her are the questions we should ask. So we should absolutely identify there's a problem without question. If you see a kid with a cut on her arm, that she's cut herself, that should be an absolute klaxon going off that we should do something. But it's not a symptom of an illness that resides in her brain that should be treated. So there's absolute problems that we need to respond to, and our society actually isn't that good at responding to problems, but that's different from identifying that the kid herself has something wrong with her that needs to be treated.
Yeah.
The system has got something wrong with it, and we need to change the system.
But then if this, in a new system where if, somebody shows signs of, self-harm, and somebody can go, oh, counselling sessions, medication, whatever it would be, that might be one system. The other system might be, full total assessment of that child's upbringing,
absolutely,
domestic abuse within a home, maybe bullying, social network use, and all that kind of thing as well. But that seems to be so huge
Come on.
But as an undertaking, it's easier to do the other system, isn't it? To then go into everybody's lives, it's a huge undertaking. We'll take a huge amount of manpower and investment to sort of make that work.
We are the sixth richest and probably the cleverest society that has ever existed on this planet. Of course, we can afford it. If we can afford to build self-driving electric cars, if we can build a tunnel under the Channel Tunnel, and if we can send unmanned communication satellites up into geosynchronous orbit, then we could find a way of protecting kids from being bullied on social media. I mean, I don't accept the idea that because it's a little bit expensive, we'll still buy Maseratis, but we won't protect children from harm. So no, sorry, I don't. It's always bad when you're doing these interviews to argue with the host. But no, I think we can absolutely afford it, and we should afford it, and it's part of our priorities in life. And that, I think, is also part of this idea that when problems emerge, when we see people sad and lonely and depressed, part of the idea of seeing the problem as lying within them, as them being ill, is part of the way that we isolate the rest of society from their problems. So instead of saying, what do we need to do to build a society in which this happens less frequently, we go, let's see if we can get them the treatment that they need. So I think this atomization and identification is part of it. And yeah, of course it's expensive, but that's...
No, absolutely.
I mean, I'm a grandfather, so we should do nothing other than protect the well-being of our grandchildren.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the point of view that I'm putting across there is the point of view which comes back, if you like, down from the powers that be when people suggest ideas like this, when people suggest about going into schools, focusing on young people and saying everybody has mental health. It's not just something which affects 1 in 4 people potentially in adult life. And that always comes across. But then when you see what governments are actually looking to do, it's 21,000 extra mental health workers. It's the, it's mental health helplines, and it's the reactionary stuff. You're talking about absolute proactivity.
Yeah, and I was at a meeting, because I'm a professor, right? So I was at a meeting of an organisation called Public Health England. They do all sorts of wonderful work, but in part they set the priorities for preventative work in the health service. And we were talking about the way in which, for instance, helping parents to be better parents saves about 14 times as much money as it costs to put on the programmes. So if you get kids that are struggling, or if you get parents that are struggling, and you work the system in such a way that you can claw back the money to provide those parents with the sort of social and psychological support that would make them better parents, yeah, it costs a bit of money, but the economists have calculated that society saves itself 14 times as much money. For instance, I mean, even if people are caught up in the criminal justice system, if you manage to avoid that, you save enormous amounts of money. If kids need specialised schooling, it's enormously expensive, and if you can prevent that, you save us lots of money. So part of it is making the investment now for things that would be preventative in the future.
Politicians have been making decisions for centuries that have affected people's lives in many different ways. Is there anything in particular that you've noticed in the last 8 years since the austerity programme kicked in, which might actually be affecting those things that aren't specifically directed to mental health, but actually are directed to and linked to mental health based on what you've talked about in this more holistic sense?
So there are 3 things that we've noticed. The first is when people lose their jobs. We live in a very gendered society, a very sexist society, so it shouldn't, but it does impact on men differently to women. When people lose their jobs, and especially when men lose their jobs, it has a very measurable, quite immediate impact on their mental health. So economic performance matters, and especially employment. Second thing is the austerity programme, and I'm absolutely no fan of the government. When you cut... Even if the NHS budget is maintained, if you cut social support, then people's mental health suffers. Partly because things like exercise and community activity and connection with other people and leisure activity and the arts, they're all good for our mental health. So when social services are cut, our mental health suffers. But there's a third thing I've noticed over the past 8 years, which is great, which is our politicians, right from the top, are talking about mental health in an inclusive way. So when I started in my profession, we were talking about mental health in terms of them. They need, they should. If they become depressed, then they should. What's wrong with them? And now we're starting to talk about us and our mental health. So lots of people in employers and politicians are talking about what we should be doing to protect our mental health. I happen to be part of a BBC TV programme that involved the royal princes, and they were talking, not with me, but I was just off camera, about first of all, the impact of their mother's death on their mental health. And they were talking about the help that they, both formal and informal, that they'd received. So you get the royal family talking about, politicians are talking about their own mental health issues and the care that they've received, the help that they've received, and members of their family. So right from the top, politicians are starting to change the way that we talk about mental health. And that's led to really quite positive conversations with senior politicians about how we could work together to improve our mental health. And that, I think, is a really positive side of some of the things that are coming out. We've got a much more mature and intelligent and compassionate approach towards mental health than we had 25 years ago.
Peter, it's a fascinating topic. I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting event as well. The Pint of Science Festival running from the 14th to the 16th of May. Peter's discussion, chat, talk will be on the 14th itself at Leaf Based on Bold Street, and we really appreciate you joining us on the programme as well. University of Liverpool got loads of information via their website and also pintofscience.co.uk. Peter Kinderman, Professor of Clinical Psychology at the University of Liverpool, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
On Radio City Talk.